Now, as I'm sure we're all well aware by now, generative AI is posing an existential threat to traditional written assessments. Mainly because AI can do a pretty good job of writing whole essays in seconds. And it's getting increasingly difficult to tell if something has been written by a ChatGPT or by a real human student. And this is all a completely different thing to standard forms of plagiary where bits from books and websites are copied and pasted into essays. I mean, that kind of cheating is relatively easy to deal with. Systems like Turnitin can both identify copied sources and provide clear evidence. So if a student did try to sneakily claim that they had written the second chapter of A Brief History of Time, Turnitin would easily show that, well, no, they didn't. But you can't do this with generative AI. I mean, for a start, there's no original source that can be identified, and this means that there's never any clear evidence. There's no actual proof. So, yes, there are things nominally called AI detectors out there. But all these can provide is a best guess on whether AI has been used. And they often guess wrong. Even the developers of AI detection systems are careful to warn that a positive result should never be the sole basis of action. It's just not reliable enough. Instead, positive results should always be backed up by an additional process like vivas. But this unreliability isn't the worst of it, because AI detectors are also algorithmically racist. There is clear evidence to show that AI detectors are much more likely to give a false positive, in other words, incorrectly claim your essay's been written by AI, if your first language is not English. Now, of course, this is because the detectors are trained primarily on English language sources, but this means that AI detectors are much more likely to get you investigated for being a cheat if English isn't your first language, which is a real problem for diverse institutions like UEL. And if all this wasn't enough, AI detectors are, well, actually incredibly easy to evade. A little paraphrasing, and frankly, the AI detector is completely negated. So, what can we do instead? Well, the most common answer to this question is simply to change the assessment. After all, it's difficult for AI to give your in-person presentation on your behalf, or to get AI to participate in group work on your behalf. But changing assessments is not always easy to do. It can be a complicated and lengthy process, and many of you might be stuck with traditional written assessments for the time being. So for those of you who are stuck with written assignments and wondering how to guard against AI cheating, here are the most common signs that AI might have been used, together with some simple ways that you can use this information in your assessment designs to make them a bit more AI-proof. Although it is easy to think that AI is everywhere and has access to everything, in reality, AI doesn't have access to a lot of the information that your students need. ChatGPT does not have subscriptions to academic journals, and cannot therefore trawl through lots of published research. So instead, it makes stuff up. For example, it knows that a citation might be stylistically needed at a certain point in the essay, so it uses its understanding of academic stylistic conventions to invent one that looks right. Of course, marking essays is a time-consuming business, so checking every reference and citation in all of your students' essays is impossible. However, there are some things that you can do. At draft stage and in the final marking process, you can incorporate spot checks of references. You can even develop a peer-based activity in which students check each other's references, and this can be a helpful activity to build students' confidence and understanding of academic referencing. You can require that students add additional support for their citations. screenshots of a page cited and things like that. Now, of course, this does add to the workload for students, so to balance this, you might want to make it part of your marking criteria. Lots of citations can be thrown into any text randomly to give the impression that it's been widely researched. But direct quotations or references to specific pages in sources evidence a much more specific knowledge of the text itself, and this is much harder for AI to invent. Generative AI is driven by algorithms that identify markers or signs related to the styles of language. What does academic writing statistically contain more of? The higher the statistical frequency of specific markers, the more AI will use them. This can lead AI content to sound repetitive because it's only thinking in terms of including the right percentage of specific markers. For example, it might conclude that academic writing uses the word therefore as a connective 72% of the time. But it won't review a paragraph and think, oops, I've used the word therefore a bit too much here. In the same way, AI might determine that the average paragraph length in academic writing is 87 words long. As such, you might find that every paragraph it produces is between 80 and 100 words in length, over and over again. In short, AI will write in predictable patterns. Now, we can counter this by forcing assignments away from generic uniform structures and towards varied forms that are tied to specific anchors or evidence. For example, now this is a little difficult as many of us have spent years directing students that there is a correct way to write academically. And fair enough, because students often worry about this. They want to know things like, how many references should I have in my essay, or how many paragraphs? But being too prescriptive can end up encouraging students to write in a repetitive style indistinguishable from AI. Instead, you can provide students with a range of examples that adopt different tonal styles, but which are all appropriate to the level. For example, you might design a written assessment that requires an outline or plan, and an end-of-assignment reflection, as well as the critical essay itself, making it much harder for AI to replicate. As you're probably realizing by now, AI models are trained to sound right, not to be right. So AI-generated text will often lean more heavily on using polished academic language than on specific actual evidence. So it will sound great, but ultimately be rather vague and detached, like a slick communicator doing a book review on a book they haven't read.
Bart, did you read the book?
Mrs. Krabappel, I am insulted. Is this a book report or a witch hunt?
Now let's think about how human beings might communicate. If you were to catch students discussing their essays outside of class, you'd probably hear them focusing mostly on specific pieces of evidence. Oh, that article we read a couple of weeks back, that video from last week's class, or what the lecturer said this morning. Now, it might not sound as slick or as confident, but it will be specific. So how can you include this in your planning? If you're providing specific data sets or texts for students and base written assignments on them, you're immediately demanding the writing be specific for something in the class itself. And this will make the assignment harder to be replicated by AI. And we can often end up making very hard distinctions between reflective and non-reflective writing by making non-reflective writing sound very distant. It sounds like somebody who already knows stuff, rather than someone who has just learned stuff. But there's no particular reason why students shouldn't be allowed to relate aspects of their written submissions to the module timeline. For example, if a particular topic or set of data is referenced in Week 3 lectures. Now, this connection to specific and local evidence is something that AI cannot easily do. Now, on a similar theme, the tendency of AI to rely on generalizations can be far more noticeable in reflective writing assignments. Because one thing AI definitely doesn't have is a life. AI doesn't struggle to get up at the morning at 6:20 a.m. or trip up the stairs on platform 8 at Stratford Station. AI doesn't worry that passengers are silently judging them or accidentally notice they've been singing Bon Jovi songs out loud while listening to them on headphones. Instead, AI can often end up resorting to platitudes like, "I learned that each new morning is a new challenge to be conquered," or "I discovered the freedom of letting my personality shine through," and other such nonsense. To quote from the songwriter Nick Cave, human experience is a blood and guts business. But algorithms don't feel. Data doesn't suffer. ChatGPT has no inner being. It's been nowhere. It has endured nothing. It has not had the audacity to reach beyond its limitations. So when planning your reflective assignments, get students to write about places, the times, the feelings that make those contexts meaningful. If reflective assignments include timestamps of key events or photos or scribbled notes, all of this is the kind of contextual evidence that AI can't do. Remembering again that AI models are trained to sound right, not to be right. And what AI thinks sounds right is entirely dependent on what sources it draws from. So, if an AI model draws its idea of academic language from papers written by American postgrad students, then that's how it will sound. Now, this kind of tone can be easily picked up if you know your own students well enough. You already have a sense of your students' personal voice, their way of expressing themselves and their ideas. A sudden switch from sounding like a normal human being to sounding like someone presenting at a NASA conference can really stand out. But what if you don't know your students? What if you've never taught them before? What if you have a class of 500? Now, a common response to this question is to focus on previous work by the students, getting them to submit exemplars against which future writing styles can be checked. However, there are some problems with this. A student can, for example, simply paraphrase themselves what AI has written. And suddenly the use of these exemplars doesn't work because the style is going to be consistent. The best mechanism here to make life difficult for AI is get students to submit assignment plans, drafts, and version histories along with their final submission. Getting AI to write something requires minimal actual process. There's no need for revisions, corrections, rethinks, or reworkings, or maneuvers into new directions. But having to try and retroactively recreate this kind of process evidence would probably take more work than simply writing the assessment in the first place. So this can be a good way to dissuade people from getting AI to write their work for them. If you've ever tried using generative AI, you'll probably already have noticed this, but AI is half-hearted. Give it a nice, long, detailed prompt. Well, for example, make me a picture of Doctor Who's TARDIS, the TARDIS belonging to the 12th Doctor, sitting on top of a mountain. The mountain is in Florida. And here you get your TARDIS on a mountain, and I suppose it looks like it could be Florida, but I had been thinking about those beaches, in Florida. And hang on, that's not the 12th Doctor's TARDIS? There are some parts of the prompt that require a context that AI doesn't have, like the fact that I was thinking of beaches rather than swamps when I said Florida. and so it produces the wrong thing. And there are other parts of the prompt that are quite nuanced or niche, like which version of the TARDIS to use. And because AI cannot really interpret this properly, it's reverted to a generalised idea of the TARDIS, rather than the specific one I wanted. AI chooses the closest well-trodden version of a solution, and this can often mean that it produces something maybe related to, but not directly answering the question. And this is quite handy because we can make life more difficult for AI if we... Assignment tasks or essay questions can include multiple clauses or parts relating to the expected outcomes. The more parts there are, the harder it is for AI to fake. For example, instead of an essay question such as define Marxism, you can have something like define Marx's views about property and how they've influenced economic theories. Include a comparative analysis of Marx's views with those of Keynes. We've already talked about the fact that AI has problems dealing with issues of context. And again, we can take advantage of this by including contextual elements in assignment titles. So, for example, define Marx's views about property and how they've influenced economic theories. Include a comparative analysis of Marx's views with those of Keynes, with direct reference to the case studies explored in this module. There's a lot more that we could talk about in relation to this subject, but I hope this has been useful for you. If it has been useful, do please remember to click on the like and subscribe buttons. I think that's the thing I'm meant to say. We'll be looking at a later video at how we can use similar tips like this to manage oral presentations.